Welcome back to the Psalm 40 Project. I am here with Reverend Ruth Boven. Yeah, so just to clarify, you were kind of going in to get a better understanding and a better grasp on your beliefs, and not necessarily thinking that it was going to turn into you ministering out to other people.
Yes, I mean, I knew I would be able to use that education in some way in whatever I was going to be doing in the future, but I didn't have a picture of being a pastor at the time. But it was interesting how that sort of just kept taking shape as I was involved in some visiting of folks at church, some who didn't believe women should be, in ministry, but would say things like, I'm struggling with this because I don't believe women should be ministers, but you'll make a good one. So it was, a time of discerning, and my call was sort of taking shape in both being active in ministry and in the education that I was getting at the seminary.
Yeah, you mentioned how your time in Mozambique kind of challenged your faith and brought up some questions. I find it kind of interesting interviewing Mike. He had sort of a similar experience when he went over to the Middle East right before seminary, and seeing how there is a difference. Sometimes we do get these blinders on us, and we don't quite know what's going on in the world. So that's I think it's interesting that two of our ministers had a very similar impact.
Well, and I think I should say too that seminary didn't necessarily answer all of my questions either. I went with a lot of questions, and it didn't answer all of my questions. It did give me, though, a deeper appreciation for a God who was bigger, I think, than I grew up thinking God was.
Okay.
I think I left seminary perhaps with more questions than were answered for me, in some sense. But I think I realized, too, that training mostly helped me to be a part of a community that is struggling and working on this together. I think I imagined that being a pastor was always leading and always telling people what to do and how to think and what to believe. But what I find to be true, and what I think really is the nature of the church, is that we are in this together, and we're discerning together, and we're praying together and seeking to follow God's lead together. And yes, we each have a particular role in that, but there are so many faithful people here that are teaching me, and giving input and increasing my faith. And I find that particularly too with people who are struggling in their lives. Their encounters with God at that level can sometimes be so much deeper and so much truer, and with a brand new perspective than they had when life was all good and everything was great, So
there is something to being in an uncomfortable place. And meeting God in a different way.
Absolutely.
Sometimes you kind of wish that wasn't the case.
I often wonder, why does that have to be the case? But it just is.
Well, and I think to some degree, we do need to be shaken out of our comfortability, the way that we see the world, because if not, then there is no way for us to change. There's no growth.
That's right.
So I am sensing that through your work as a missionary and your own sort of struggle trying to figure things out, that's kind of what has shaped your ministry. This caring for people. You're caring for people in a church rather than a mission field, and then this sort of struggle, wrestling, wondering, growing in yourself has translated to doing that with people. Is that sort of how you see your call developing, or in a different
many
area?
ways? No, I think that's right. It's interesting. So yes, God had an impact on me through Mozambique, but I should back up and say also that He had a tremendous impact on me through my growing up years too, through my parents, particularly my dad, who Well, and my mom too. They always had their eye on people who were a little marginalized.
Oh.
So in the church, my dad was almost always an elder. He would get off for the couple years that you could be off, and then he was back on. Because, not so much because he was sort of the picture of a really strong leader. It was more because he was the picture of a gentle heart who was sensitive to the struggling. And so the teenager with a pimpled face and the no friends and the hanging his head when he came into church, that was the guy my dad headed right for after church.
Okay.
You know, the person who was struggling with addiction and no one else sort of knew how to talk to him or approach him, that was my dad. That was the first person, you know, he'd go to talk to after worship. And so he always was reaching out, and my mom too. But his opportunities as an elder in church just gave him more, you know, of those opportunities. And so I grew up with that that same heart, sort of paying attention to those on the margins who are sometimes overlooked by other people.
Yeah.
So that really did shape both, I think, our call to Mozambique, you know, and then my call to be involved with people. Because, you know, what I have found too after visiting, you know, for a lot of years now, sickness is an isolating thing too. It isolates. You feel isolated from others, and often it can feel like when you're sitting in the hospital or when you're in a hospice bed. Life is going on for everyone else, and it has really stopped for you. And that can be sort of an isolating experience. And the privilege then of being able to step into that space and say, first of all, God has not forgotten you. You know, God is here with you. And though it may not feel like it, though you may feel very alone, I want to assure you, you know, through scripture and prayer and my presence, that God is with you. And then secondly, I come on behalf of the church. You know, and so the church is with you too. And I often remind people when I visit them in the hospital that we're praying for you. You know, we prayed for you this past Sunday. We mention you by name. You know, we're praying for your recovery or whatever. And just a good reminder that they are not, as isolating as it feels, they're not alone.